Our panel comprises esteemed experts who work at the intersection of research, policy, and practice in language education, language access, and equity. You can learn more about them on the webinar's webpage. This page has been shared. The page for the webinar will be shared in chat. If time allows, our speakers will answer questions from webinar attendees. Please use the Q&A box to share your questions with us. We will answer as many as possible at the end of our discussion. You can also choose to use the chat button at the bottom of your screen to share your thoughts and comments anytime. You can try it out by letting us know where you are joining from today. And with that, I will now pass the webinar over to our facilitators.
Thank you very much, Althea, and another warm welcome to Doctora España. So glad to have you on and share some of your little bit of your wealth and your knowledge and your expertise with the larger group. I have a question to get the conversation going. Two ideas seem really central to your work. So translanguaging pedagogy, challenging monolingual assumptions, and translingual literature as a way to affirm bilingual and multilingual students. And I'm looking forward to, you unpacking some of that for us.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks, Anadeli. I love these questions. It's my life. It's who I am. And so I embody translanguaging because for me, I was a sixth grade bilingual teacher when I started this journey in education. And I taught dual language bilingual, transitional bilingual. And the way I taught, I was enacting a translanguaging pedagogy. Sometimes I would do read alouds of books that were in Spanish or in English, and the students use their full language repertoire and they would have conversations. They would write. I would see them writing using different features of Spanish, different features of English. I just didn't know what to call it then. I was like, is this code switching? Is this just, are they going from one language to another? And it was so beautiful to then go into grad studies and look at the research on translanguaging and learn from the greats. And so I'll talk a little bit about that in the presentation about how it helped me have a view of language without the borders that people have placed around them. So translanguaging as a theory of language that incorporates a full linguistic repertoire that we use. And it is an insider perspective because us bilingual and multilinguals are like, this is how we navigate the world. But it's also a method of teaching. And then the best thing about my work now is that I'm looking so deeply at literature and how we have beautiful children's literature, young adult literature, middle grade literature that shows you examples of authors being authentic with the way, that we navigate the world in our languages and different identities and cultures, and get to see that on the page and how beautiful that is that we could bring that to the classroom, bring that for teacher preparation. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today.
I'm excited.
Yeah, so I wanted to show some visuals because I knew that question was coming because that's in the title. And so I wanted to start just for those of you who are like, okay, I hear you, but like I need to see it. And of course, these will be shared with everyone, and I'll go back and forth so that way you don't have to take notes furiously. But I love this piece by Ofelia Garcia and Camila Leiva. Camila Leiva was a high school English teacher. She's an art activist, muralist, and in their article that they wrote together, they talk about translanguaging as putting together, you see translanguaging as a bilingual language practice. It's a pedagogy, but it's also a method or a vehicle for social justice. Because so many times in our in institutions, whether they're schools or other institutions, monolingual English is like pushed, whether it's in curriculum or in professional development. Like I've been doing all these PD sessions in Spanish and it's throwing people off because they're like, I'm so used to being in PD in English. Translanguaging in the latest edition of this beautiful book, The Translanguaging Classroom, it talks about it being as the language practices of participants, right, of children. Instead of saying language as being, starting with these socially constructed languages and how fixed these borders are around language, we're looking at the speakers, we're listening to them, we're seeing how they're navigating language, right? So I love that sentence at the bottom that says, we believe that translanguaging transcends these false dichotomies that reproduce, right, this English only or Spanish only or Arabic only, monoglossic language ideologies and continue to shape the discourse about language in our society. So I'm a big fan of Kate Seltzer, Susana Ibarra-Johnson, and Ofelia Garcia's book. It's a key text for those of you wanting to create these spaces in classrooms. And this is a funny way to see it. But remember back in the day, this meme with like Cardi. I was like, my mom said. So I made one up. I made one because it's so cute. I love it. And it's clear. My mama said, you need to let me use my entire linguistic repertoire. So we're moving from this language being separate to I'm gonna use all the features of my language, right? So when I taught Dominican, Mexican, Puerto Rican, some Central American students in my dual language bilingual class, um, they had all kinds of Spanish. And I came in with my Chilean Spanish that we have this really unique, as everyone does, like expressions. And, and instead of me being like, no, my Spanish is the best, or the typical thing you hear, like the Colombian Spanish or the one from Spain. No, no, no. We all have our ways of saying things in different regions, and we're going to celebrate them. We're going to put them on a chart, and you're going to teach me, I teach you. I love Mike Mena's way of talking about translanguaging. He has this free, he has a whole YouTube called The Social Life of Language. And he gives us this like different views of language versus the external, the person who doesn't have this experience versus the internal perspective of those who we do this all the time. So you can download this sheet from his YouTube site, and you'll get these slides later so you can go back. And finally, I'll just to end with that part, and then I'll go into more examples that I want to share today. In the book En Comunidad, co-author Lucia Dira Herrera and I, we envision translanguaging as a key part of our teaching. Meaning we're looking at culturally and linguistically sustaining topics. We're finding texts that are going to be in solidarity with children's experiences, especially multilingual, bilingual children's experiences. And we're using translanguaging both in our communication with students, in our teaching, and as a way to advocate for being more authentic in the way we teach. And then I'll give some examples a little later about the other work, the translanguaging collections, because it's been beautiful to look at examples of literature that shows this in action for different languages, right? So far I've mentioned Spanish because that's my particular site of research and my own experience as a bilingual dual language Spanish English teacher. But I wanted to acknowledge that, and I'll give you some examples. And why that's so important in our teaching is that language is such a big part of our identity, right? And so making sure that as teachers, we self-reflect on our ideas about language, right? I remember when an administrator came to me when I was a 6th grade teacher, and this administrator came to me and with a new student and goes, oh, we have this new student. Oh, they're from Dominican Republic. And I was like, that's a beautiful, why are you writing? This is great because I have so many students from Dominican Republic. That's amazing. They can like buddy up, they can help each other. Like, this is great. And so we had to do a lot of unpacking there about why there was this, why that reaction? What ideas do you have about this student's language versus students who would not be from the Dominican Republic? And I'm really grateful that there are people helping me think through this and how to have those conversations, and I'll name them and show that to you. Because we have to, like number 2, practice a pedagogy that we need to unlearn our hierarchies that we have around language. And we have to enact translanguaging as a disruption to that and say, hey, all these students are bringing their beautiful, features in their language repertoire. And celebrate all these practices. And I'll show you examples of that, what that means. But before I do that, I have to recognize the legacies that I'm following in this. This work with translanguaging pedagogy and this work with translingual literature couldn't happen if it weren't for all the people who have done work in culturally responsive pedagogy, like Laura Latson-Billings, who you see with the Black Lives Matter shirt there. It wouldn't happen without the work of culturally sustaining pedagogies that you see, the tall scholar in the back, right? Django Paris. And I love that book the Culturally Sustaining Pedagogies book, that talks about how in this retreat they came together and they were talking about how can we support, right, this intergenerational building and keep growing our work. I do that through different conferences, whether it's a National Council of Teachers of English that have helped me develop my understanding of how we're teaching English and is there room for translanguaging? Yes, there is room. Thankfully, they said yes for me to present on translanguaging. Several people have published and won articles, which I'll show you next. In New York specifically, they had the collective radical educators, ARA. A lot of you are part of these conferences. ASA, like there are spaces where people are having these conversations, and I think it's important to acknowledge that because you cannot do this on your own. especially in schools or institutions where you might get pushback. So can you find your people at these organizations? So culturally sustaining pedagogies, right? It looks at cultural dexterity. It looks at ways that we're sustaining our students and stands on the shoulders of Gloria Latin Billings. And I love, this is why I told you I was going to name the people who are helping me name these problems with language hierarchies in schools and elsewhere are Nelson Flores, so you see there in the middle, and Jonathan Rosa. And this is my go-to text set that I highly recommend. If you're facing this pushback or you're finding it difficult to have these conversations when people say, well, the Spanish is better, or the English from a certain part of the States or England is better. I really appreciate their work in coining the term racial-linguistic ideologies so we can look at how race and ideas of race and language are co-constructed and what that looks like in the classroom. And they're children's books, and we see this in books, and they're helping us have these conversations around language and identity. Like The Day You Begin, and Jacqueline Woodson has the character that's starting like the first day. And I love this character, Rigoberto. There will be times when no one understands the way words curl from your mouth, the beautiful language of the country you left behind. My name is Rigoberto. We just moved here from Venezuela. And because they don't understand, the classroom will fill with laughter until the teacher quiets everyone. And this is just one slice of this beautiful picture book, right? But there are authors who are helping us have these conversations about language and identity. Juana Medina, from Bogota. I forgot to say Jacqueline Woodson. I mean, I hope everyone's familiar with like our former national ambassador of children's literature and young adult youth. Now I forgot the title. National ambassador to young people's literature. Juana Medina from Colombia has this character who is going to learn English. And how do they feel about English? How do they feel about reading books? And the book has a bunch of translanguaging there with English and Spanish. Duncan Tonatiuh, a lot on Mexican culture. And in this one, you have specific vocabulary. In this case, for some of them, you'll see in picture books, they might be italicized. I love this book, Drawn Together. You have Vietnamese author, Filipino descent illustrator, and you have these gorgeous, gorgeous illustrations and narrative to show you the tension between a grandparent and a grandchild when it comes to language and how do they communicate. So please watch that video. Daniel Jose Older, the young adult series Shadow Shaper. Language and identity central to the relationship between the child and the grandparent, and how they communicate. And you see Spanish flowing throughout. Not italicized. Daniel Jose Older has a great video on why he does not italicize in his books when there's a word in Spanish in a book published in English. He doesn't want to other it. I worked with this New York State, Languages of New York State, CUNY NICEP guide, and I show this to my future teachers, and I say, hey, for different states, depending where you teach, specifically I'm in New York, we look at what are the orientation videos given to families so they understand the different options so that their children get support for their bilingualism. And what's the best option for them? And so in my book, Narrative Writing with Latinx Teens, I approach this topic of translanguaging and translingual literature by thinking of different topics that we teach and how can I curate multimodal text sets so students have access to topics. So whether it's a topic on mental health, this one is specifically on migration. I have here a documentary with a Puerto Rican investigative journalist. I have poems by Ariana Brown and Alan Peláez Lopez and Daryl Holness Older. Novels in verse. So my approach to saying, how do I turn the theory and like best practices that I have in my head or that I've seen in research, how do I turn it into curating text sets so I can have these conversations with children and students. This is specifically for adolescents. And so I have prompts in each chapter to help them process these types of multimodal translingual texts. Especially poetry, I use visual spoken word, poems. This is around the same topic. This is a novel in verse with a picture book because picture books can be used for all ages. And so I love partnering a picture book with another text at different levels. This is a young adult novel, The Grief Keeper, where it says video unavailable. You could watch it when you click on it, but It's a conversation from the Latinx Kid Lit Book Festival on the author and other authors talking about world building and fantasy texts. And so for me, it was really important that I curate and support teachers with these text sets for those different topics. And then the final one example that I wanted to, before I go there, is where do we go next? So I'm giving all these examples, the legacies we started with, and where can we go to look at what scholars have been doing in their research? And so I'm going to name about 4 examples only to wrap up, and then I'll take some questions. I know they might be coming in. I can't keep up with the chat, so I'm excited to see what questions come next. So Valerie Kinlock, I love this piece. You Ain't Making Me Right, Culturally Sustaining Pedagogies and Black Youth's Performances of Resistance. I left you with an example. For each of these, I broke these down for you with their different methods, because I know we have some practitioners in the call. We have people who do research. And I've gotten this question a lot about people, teachers, especially practitioners who are interested in doing research on what's happening in the classroom. And so I wanted to share these examples with you because it's important to see that researchers are doing work with teachers. So this is specifically with 2 English high school classes. And they look at student artifacts, but also there's interviews and analysis of the materials. And something that they found, I love this quote: "One way for teachers to view students' resistances as invitations into learning is by working with students to co-construct classroom spaces that support multiple literacy engagements and perspectives." I love this piece. Please take a look at it. The other we have by Indigenous researchers, which I love, thinking about this topic of translanguaging and translingual literature beyond the mainstream dominant languages of Spanish and English. So those are usually the lens that people might be thinking of. And also Mandarin Chinese have been like the 3 that I've seen a lot in mainstream academia conversations, also in conferences. But with these examples, I want to make sure we think big, that especially in centering people from the global majority, Black, Indigenous, scholars and research that we might not see elsewhere. And so they did a case study on Native American Community Academy, the pseudonym for the school, and Puente de Oso. And they, again, interviews, focus groups, all of these things I'm sharing because you can do this too, like partner, university, school partnerships. It's important to do research to find, what's best. I love this. Indigenous languages are inseparable from this educational approach. Language is vital to cultural continuity, because it embodies both everyday and sacred knowledge and is essential to ceremonial practices. Language is also significant for sustaining Indigenous knowledge systems, communities, cultural identifications, and connections to land. I love this. And then finally, with these 3 in this series of 3 Irisari's For Us, By Us, with Latinx youth. In this study, it was 2 years. The youth were the researchers. They were enrolled in this action research at their high school, taught by their researcher, had an advocacy stance, and they explored their curriculum and learning experiences. So get the young people involved, right? We can do youth participatory action research to talk about the role of translanguaging, translingual literature, language and identity. And I'll skip those. I don't know, this project was new to me when it began, but I found out about this through my colleague, because I share an office with him. Mike Mena is the Demystifying Language Project. And they've taken some amazing research and made it accessible for your high school student audience. And so they have a lot of articles that they've rewritten with high school students, made it accessible on this topic. So if you're here for this webinar, it's because you're interested in this topic. Go to Demystifying Language Project and you'll have so much fun with all their resources. Another place we go from here, like amazing researchers and scholars doing this work that you might find in books that might not be titled like Translanguaging, Translingual Literature. All right, Education and Movement Spaces, Educating Emergent Bilinguals, a classic, has a 3rd edition out. Teaching about gender diversity, I found the Latin language work in that book, and that for me was really powerful. So I've been using a lot of the examples there, especially in times where I'm thinking about vulnerable populations, not only being multilingual students, but students who are LGBTQIA students or neurodivergent students. So I'm always looking for ways to bring in that language work in an intersectional way. And so Pedagogies of Voice is also another one that has been helping me lately with that. And these two, because I think, again, in an intersectional lens, what does language look like in these times when I'm also trying to support work around restorative justice and work around immigration justice. And so these organizations are helping me do that. And to end, finally, with my last 3 minutes, I think, because we want to make sure we get time for that. Well, I think it was 4:25. I can't remember the agenda. I read it through. Okay, 3 minutes. Last thing I'll do, I'm currently in a project, I just want to tell you, where we are creating curriculum. The teachers in New York City public schools from the Office of Multilingual Learners said, well, English language arts is doing this in ELA. They're using expeditionary learning, HMH, they're using Winnism. We have nothing for Spanish language arts. So they're creating it. They created modules that align to those on the same themes, SLA being Spanish language arts, CLA being Chinese language arts. The teachers are doing it. I'm just there to support with text selection and feedback. Here's a module that they have for Hero module, the books that they selected on resilience, on courage, and untold stories. These will be taught in Spanish aligned to their ELA themes. So they're thinking about how to be more thematically aligned with their teaching. And that's my latest project. I'm really excited. They're piloting it in 7th and 8th grade this coming year. They did 6th grade last year. And the last resource I'll leave with you is that Translanguaging collection that I talked about earlier. For those of you interested in more translingual literature, there are 15 texts for each of those topics on the screen, from picture books through chapter books. And I'll pause right there because I know I want to leave the last 5 for questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. España. Again, everyone, I know we have a couple of questions. I'm Teresa Satterfield Linares, and I'm going to start in the order that I've been seeing the questions come through. So we have a question from Multilingual India, Aritra, who asked, do you think that footnotes in other languages will help children to promote biliteracy, or is that more of a distraction?
That's a great question. I'm seeing that a lot as a mother. So I read a lot of translingual texts with my child, and I have not seen that as a distraction. Instead, I've seen it as like, she's so excited to then either go to the footnote or the glossary. We don't necessarily do that every time we read the different pages. It depends like on her enthusiasm with the story. But I love that it's there as an option. In Vamos, the series Vamos by Raúl III, there's a glossary in the back, and there are like little footnotes or little asterisks that'll be like, this is in English in the back. Like, so there was a little letter in one of the pages, and it was in English, and then they were like, you could read the Spanish translation in the back. I love giving them that option. So I think it's great. And as a teacher, you just have to be intentional with like, this is what we're going to do, and just be clear with the students and how you're using the resources. As a parent, I love it. Like, yes, give me more, give me all the supports. It's really tough raising bilingual, multilingual children and when English is dominant in different spaces.
Very nice. Yeah, I agree. All the resources that are available, right? And there's a question from Alex, who is a prospective teacher and is interested in learning more. You've given us a lot to think about and lots of titles and different activities. Do you have a quick answer about some activities that can help students who are of varying cultures and backgrounds work together?
Yes. I mean, prospective teachers, yay. Thank you for choosing this profession. I think it's beautiful. I think for me, the first thing we have to do is practice it ourselves instead of going straight to the lessons, right? So if you can practice whatever it is that you want your students to also practice, so whether it's like, oh, I'm going to read a book, like I read Randy Ribai's, ¿cómo se llama ese? El Patron Saints of Nothing. And it has a lot of Tagalog in there. And this one, I don't know if you know this, is one of my favorite young adult novels of all time. And I had to do this myself, like take a book excerpt. What is it that I'm noticing here? Can I try this as a writer? I read graphic novels that show me different languages too. So what does it mean as a reader to understand a book that has different languages? What does it mean as a writer? Can I do that as well? So my first thing is like, put yourself in their shoes, try it out, right? My next language is I want to learn Arabic. And so I have my notebook, like I'm getting started because I had students from Yemen, and when I was a seventh grade teacher, I'm going to start my notebook with like Arabic, English, Spanish. So that would be my best advice always, is to grow in a lot of empathy for what our multilingual learners are going through by understanding like their language practices. And so immerse yourself in the literature and before we go to the lesson plans. And then I have tons of books to recommend you for lesson plans. So towards the end, where are my books? Like, get all these books and here are all the other books I have, right? So I left you a bunch of other slides I didn't get to with Katy de los Rios and Kate Seltzer, but a lot of examples.
Wonderful, wonderful. There's a question here from Jen who wants to know your stance on assessing L1, so first language, to further leverage translanguaging.
Yes, yes to assessments. I'm very cautious with assessments, and I go to the experts on like, what are the valid ways of assessing? So yes, I would, my ideal world, like when I was a bilingual teacher and a dual language Spanish-English teacher, I assessed my students in Spanish and in English. I had a Spanish language library and English language library, and I assessed them in Spanish for not only literacy, but also like their math. I was assessing them math in Spanish and math in English and science in Spanish and science in English. And that was wonderful because there were students who were like up there when it came to math and science and Spanish. And then in English, they were just learning that content and that language with me. So great to see. I was like, oh, it's not a content issue, it's a language issue, right? You know this in Spanish, you can. So and that's so important, right? To know, like, is it that they could understand it in one language and not the other? So that was helpful for me, yes.
And do you have a standardized assessment that you use, and maybe other than Spanish? Is there, so Woodcock-Johnson, something that you use for assessment?
Oh, yeah. I am not the expert on that. So that question, I could give you some resources that we could put on the website, because I could recommend those. I don't particularly have like a standardized one that I can recommend off the top of my head, but I'm happy to like get you that list and put it on the website. Great question, Jen Hansen. Thank you.
And there's one more. I think we have time.
Yeah.
And so how are you finding these wonderful titles that you're using?
Yes, I do so much reading. So because of my particular context, I use the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival database just for specifically Latina representation. We Need Diverse Books is a great organization for different representation for different books. But I'm at the public library at least twice a week. And I talk to librarians because they are the experts on books, because I don't want to spend so much time on the websites, on the databases. And so when you just want to talk to people, especially support libraries in these times, please support your local library. In person, librarians are my favorite, but online, I go to the databases for We Need Diverse Books and Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. And I also go to the American Library Association. Oh, that conference is amazing every year. Support the American Library Association. For those of you here in the States, I know there's some from outside the States. And then I'll join you. If anybody from Guadalajara, I want to go to your Guadalajara Feria. Hopefully next year, that's on my vision board. But I'll be in Chile in January. I don't know where else, other countries we might have, but I go to all those ferias and book festivals whenever I can.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Espana. This was amazing. So many questions that we received at the last minute. Thank you so much for your presentation. This was awesome. Thank you to our co-facilitators. You guys did great. Thank you for taking the time to be here. Thank you as well to our audience. We hope that you will continue to engage with us. Stay tuned for a follow-up email with a recording from this webinar. Also, stay tuned, locked into our Cal News and social media, where you'll see news about upcoming webinars. Thank you so much for being here today. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day.